You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the big show, folks. We certainly appreciate you guys being here. Ladies and gentlemen, children, women, and everyone in between, whatever you want to call yourself, welcome to the big circus tent in the sky. We're going to be talking about the mob today. We're not talking about, the line at the local buffet. We're talking about the mafia. La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours, as they like to call it. Or at least that's what I've heard. I don't know. I'm going to say plausible deniability. I don't recall, sir. Anyway, guys, we're going to be talking about a wonderful author and his story and his interviews with people from the mob, the mafia, the big thing. So anyway, before we get into that, as always, we got to do the plugs. So go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, and all those crazy places on the internet. He is the author of the newest book that just came out July 11th, 2023. The Life We Choose, William Big Billy Delia. Did I pronounce that right? Delia. And the last secrets of America's most powerful mafia family. Matt Birkbeck is on the show with us today, and he joins us to talk about this latest book. And it's going to be a fun read. There might be some mafia in here if you're familiar with that story. Matt is an investigative journalist and author of 6 books, including The Quiet Dawn, Deconstructing Sammy and A Deadly Secret, as well as A Beautiful Child and Finding Sharon, which were adapted by Netflix for their hit movie Girl in the Picture, for which he served as an executive producer. His work has also appeared in Playboy, Rolling Stones, New York Times, People, Reader's Digest, and other publications. What did your centerfold look like, Matt, in Playboy when you were in there?
It wasn't me, I'll tell you that.
Matt, welcome to the show. Give us a .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Give us your .coms so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
MattBirkbeck.com and matt.birkbeck.author on Instagram.
There you go. So you've written quite a few books. What made you interested in this story and telling it in this latest book of yours?
In this particular case, the story found me. Billy Delia had been the head of the Bufalino crime family from 1994 until 2006 when he went to prison. But before that, he had spent nearly 30 years as the protege and so-called son of Russell Bufalino, who was arguably the most important and influential member of organized crime in the 20th century. And Billy, I had gotten an email. It was a summer afternoon in the middle of COVID, and email said, "Are you interested in talking to Billy?" And I almost jumped out of my chair because I knew Billy. Every law enforcement agency in the country had tried to talk to Billy about things, mostly because of his relationship with Bufalino. FBI, Secret Service, Homeland Security, New York City Terrorism Task Force, and Billy didn't speak to anyone. So when I got that email and he said he'd like to talk, I said sure, and I went for it.
There you go. What drew him to you? Did you owe him money on the VIG, or what? Did he come around and be like, "Hey, it's a nice authorship you have here"? Sorry,
I'm happy to say I did not owe him money. I had covered him when I was a newspaper reporter.
Oh, really?
I did. So I knew who he was. I had covered him when he got arrested. I was writing these investigative pieces involving Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania brought casino gambling to the state in the early 2000s, and it was a mess. And who was getting licenses and how it was fixed and the corruption that was involved in all of that. And one of the individuals seeking a license was a very well-connected billionaire in Pennsylvania who had known Billy and did Billy with the Bufalinos for well over 30, 40 years. And Billy blames his arrest on this individual. Wow. Billy was also upset with the film The Irishman and how Russell had been portrayed, Russell Bufalino. You know, Russell was all powerful. And in the film, didn't appear that way. He also said that Frank Sheeran's story about him killing Jimmy Hoffa was fiction.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Billy knew Sheeran back in the early 70s through the 90s, and he was very much involved in the making of Sheeran's book. And he knew it was fiction. And so he said he wanted to set the record straight. And we ended up spending well over a year and a half talking.
That's got to be an awesome drop in the lap. I mean, that's got to be wonderful to be able to talk to him. He's billed as mafia royalty. And
he was and he is because of his relationship with Bufalino. Russell was, I once said to Billy, was Russell ever on the commission? The 5-member commission that ran the mob? And he says, no, he wasn't on the commission. He said Russell was above the commission. That's how powerful he was. So Russell had ties going back to Cuba in the 1950s. He had owned casinos. He had gone toe-to-toe with Bobby Kennedy during hearings in Washington. He had been involved in a so-called CIA mafia plots in the early 1960s where the CIA recruited members of the mob to kill Fidel Castro. And, of course, he was linked to the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa in 1975. Russell was one of the key suspects. So there was just an incredible wealth of information about Russell that only Billy knew. And so I knew that, obviously this was something I had to jump into.
There you go. I was watching before the show, the Bufalino interviews, I think probably before the Senate. I couldn't see who was on the other side, but it looked like it was some sort of Senate or House hearing. And it was interesting to see how vague he was about everything. He's like, I don't know. I don't recall.
It was classic. I mean, it was classic Bufalino, Deacon and, ducking, not really answering questions. Do you know Jimmy Hoffa? How long did you know him for? I know, I knew him. Do you know Frank Sheeran? Yeah, I met him sometime long ago. I don't remember when. So it was, that's how they used to be. It was, but he was what he was known for was being very secretive, very quiet, which is why law enforcement really could never, get its finger on the Bufalinos and what they were all about. They knew that they were powerful. They knew Russell was very powerful. And they could never, as far as Billy was concerned, they always thought he was just his driver. They had no idea the immense power and influence that Billy would eventually have.
And this is the early mob. I guess Bufalino was known as the Quiet Don. Is that correct? Yeah,
he was because of his quiet way. I did all these interviews with Billy inside the home that Bufalino had owned in Pennsylvania and lived in. And it's a very nondescript ranch house. It's not like a palace that you might think one of these mob dons might live in. But it was just, it was a ranch home in Kingston, Pennsylvania. And it's almost like a museum because it's owned by Billy D'Elia's son now. It was left to him by his wife. And it's kept exactly the way it was in, say, 1975. It's like a museum in there. So we ended up doing all the interviews in there. But you could see how Bufalino lived. He wasn't showy and didn't seek publicity, unlike some other mob leaders did, which led to their downfalls. And so for Bufalino, that was, it was smart on his part.
There was a story I heard in one of the mob sort of history things about one of the quiet dons, and it may have been Bufalino, but they're always quiet and like they didn't go themselves around or like John Gotti. Like John Gotti really broke the whole sort of image rule of trying to stay quiet. But like if you offended him or did something to I guess injure him, He wouldn't get irate or throw a fit or anything. You just end up, I don't know, in the East River or something.
it depended on, on who would say what and who would respect whom. Bufalino was treated, like I said earlier, as he was, as one of the most powerful. The government identified him in the early 1960s. U.S. identified him as one of the most powerful and violent members of organized crime in the country. But when you read this book, this is really more of a intimate look about two men. Bufalino didn't have any children. So him and his wife basically adopted Bill, who had his own, he had his father, but he had a terrible relationship with him.
Really?
He had a really bad relationship, which becomes known very early in the book. And so it's really a father and son story set against this incredible a story involving organized crime and all the different people that you meet along the way.
Hi, folks. Here's Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO. And be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show.
That's an interesting setting because, like, when I heard Francis Ford Coppola really explain what The Godfather was, it really, I mean, it's a beautiful movie, but when he explained the story is basically it's a king with 3 sons. And when you look at it from that aspect, it becomes much deeper. And like you just said, your book is about this complicated relationship between an adopted son and a father. It gives it more context, I think, in where you can understand what's really the dynamic going on. So would you call this a memoir of Billy's?
No, not at all. This is me interviewing him for a very, very long period of time and then writing his story. We did our fact checking. We made our phone calls, to kind of validate as much as we could. Had I interviewed Bill for maybe, a couple of weeks or so, I question a lot more that's in the book, but I had so much time with him and we went digging into things that he told us and did our research that we feel comfortable with it. But you're talking about a man that, you just mentioned The Godfather. There's this scene in the book where Billy answers the phone and some guy says he's Marlon Brando calling for Russell Bufalino. And Billy says, there's a guy named Marlon Brando calling for you. And he thought it was a joke. And Russell says, give me that phone. And it was Marlon Brando.
Holy crap.
Because Russell had this outsized influence on the making of The Godfather.
Oh, wow.
But before production had begun, and when they tried to stop the film, and then when Russell basically gave the okay and they started production in terms of who was actually in the movie. And members of the Bufalino family, members of the Colombo family. So Russell had great influence in the making of that movie.
Oh, wow. We had the author, Mark Seal, who wrote Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, the epic story of the making of The Godfather. And I remember he talked about that where, they weren't too happy to have this film made initially.
No, not at all. No, they caused a lot of problems for it. But the thing that was really good about Bill was that he was there. So this is first-hand account. Sometimes, actually often, you're getting third, fourth-hand accounts. And, but this is directly coming from him and his own experience and the stories that he shares. And, he's never shared these before.
There you go. So what do you think is going to maybe some teasers that might surprise people or some different things that people might find in the book that will either shock them or make them go, holy crap, I didn't even know about that?
I think just about all of the book. It's in terms of all the different people. I mean, if you think about it, we meet, Johnny Unitas, the old football legend who meets with Russell Bufalino and with Bill in the early 1970s. Of course, there's Jimmy Hoffa. And Billy answers some of the questions as to what went on with the disappearance of Hoffa. And then there's Donald Trump and Michael Jackson, which, Billy did business with Trump on a number of occasions in the 80s and 90s. And Billy eventually became Michael Jackson's co-manager because of an effort by Trump to get Jackson to perform in Atlantic City. Billy interceded to stop it. But as a reward, he told Jackson's manager he was now his partner.
Wow.
So, there's a number. I mean, the book is just, it's really what it became, though. It became more of a historical statement, which was really interesting, given so much that Billy had seen and had been a part of. So for the first time, we're seeing a lot that went on during that period.
And it's an interesting time period because, I mean, it's the old mob before what's his face, made it a show in the 90s and John Gotti and really, drew a lot of issues to himself, and it eventually, the Teflon eventually was wiped off. But it took the Justice Department quite a long time to finally pin it to him. But interesting story. And why do you feel that as Americans we're so enamored by the mob and the mafia? We love mob movies, we love mob stories, we love all this stuff. Why is that such an important thing to us?
I think it's because we see a world that we're not part of. I've often, as a journalist, seen the world as black and white with a little bit of gray in between. Doing this book is a lot of gray. Really, it's populated by people like Billy D'Elia who go in there, but it's not just organized crime either. Billy gets called in. Russell was known as the mob's negotiator. And when Russell went to prison in the late 70s and then through the 1980s, Billy took his place and he became the negotiator. I just mentioned the story with Trump and Michael Jackson and the mob. Billy got called in on a number of things, but it wasn't just organized crime. It was entertainment issues. It was sports. It was politics. When they needed help and they had to go under the table, this is who they went to. And to me, that was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. Is he happy with the book, Billy? Because he's not. I let him read it before publication. He had some concerns. He went to prison in 2008. He had been arrested in 2006 on a drug money laundering charge and attempting to kill a witness. And that charge got dropped, and he ended up spending 4 years in prison. He got out in 2012. And it was the first time he ever went to prison, and he doesn't want to go back. So he had asked if he could read it and go through it, and I said sure. We didn't take anything out. Yeah,
it was really more about him. In some things there was just like semantics, like the scene in which Billy gets made is really unusual, and this happened in the early 1970s. And Bill had concerns about admitting to the fact that he was a made member of a crime family and whether or not that put him in jeopardy. We explained to him that it wouldn't. I did, and his attorneys did. So at the end of the day, we left it in there. But he was fine with it. I think, we don't embellish anything and we don't go light on anything. It's the raw story, and it's a pretty interesting life.
The old original mob. Maybe the other reason we find it intriguing is because of the secretiveness, or what used to be the secretiveness of the mob. La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours, where we don't talk about it. And I remember it being so secret. And then there's that famous Senate hearing, I think with Bobby Kennedy in the 60s, where the guy starts, talking about La Cosa Nostra and exposing everything. And maybe it's because of the secretive nature of it, and maybe the fantasy that we have. We like Bond movies because we all like to be James Bond and be some secretive dude, and our lives mean something more than just, I don't know, going to McDonald's every day. And maybe that maybe we also have a fantasy of power and money and being in the mob and having some respect instead of, I don't know, the wife yelling at you every day.
The mob today, it doesn't exist the way it did before, say, the mid 1980s, when the government really did a number on it through its various prosecutions. But the mob had such a stranglehold on so many industries in this country. Buffalo, for one, was a power in dress manufacturing, for instance. He had all these manufacturing firms in Pennsylvania, and he had contracts coming out of New York. So he basically controlled it. He also had a stranglehold over the Teamsters Union. He had been really good friends with Jimmy Hoffa in the 1940s, and Russell placed his cousin William there, who was an attorney with Hoffa. And William became the general counsel of the Teamsters, and that gave, between his friendship with Jimmy Hoffa, that gave Bufalino incredible power, and the Teamsters ran the nation. I mean, a strike by the Teamsters cut everything down. So with that kind of power behind them, they could basically do whatever they want, and we don't see that. We don't see that today. So it's a different world.
Yeah, I think up until even the 90s, you couldn't pour a pound of cement in New York City without paying off someone in the mob, if I recall rightly. I don't know if that's
officially true, but
story. That's true. They control the cement business in New York. I mean, they're still involved with different unions in New York, but not even close to what it used to be.
Yeah.
Prior to 1990, say. The power has waned considerably.
Any chance that, there's got to be a chance that it's kind of a dumb question, but I'll just put it up. Any chance this can turn into a movie like Goodfellas or Casino or stuff like that?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I've done a couple of movies before. I just did last year on Netflix, and that's in the process. But there's all kinds of turbulence out in California right now with
that's right.
The writer strikes, the directors and whatnot. So, and the actors. So, that's going to have to get settled before anything moves forward. Yeah. But
Martin Scorsese should definitely option it.
The book just came out a week ago, and it's just the response has been overwhelming, and it's because of basically because of the story. I think it's pretty emotional and intimate between Russell and Billy. Amidst all this craziness, and then plus, of course, I touched on Hoffa before. Billy explains what happened after he disappeared. How he went to a meeting with Russell in New York, and it was to keep Frank Sheeran from killing two other men, Tony Provenzano and Anthony Salerno, who had actually ordered Hoffa's murder. And
wow.
So, but I said to Bill during our interviews, he was very close to Russell and always wanted to protect him. And I said to him, would Provenzano and Salerno have given that order without Russell's permission? And he thought about it. He said no. So I said, so Russell had to have been involved. And he said, yeah. And it made sense because Russell had just been outed as being a member of these CIA mafia plots by Time Magazine. And this was at a time where there were these church committee hearings going on in Washington, which was focused on the CIA and its recruitment of the mob. And so after that happened, a number of different people just started to disappear. Sam Giancana was murdered. Hoffa disappeared, and another Johnny Roselli was found murdered a year later. They were all members of these plots. So, Bill tells us who ordered Hoffa's disappearance. I think the thing that still remains is who actually pulled the trigger.
And where his remains ended up, I guess, huh?
Bill says, in his words, he was cooked. So
he was cremated then.
Yeah, cremated. So within, say, 10 minutes after the murder, which makes sense because you're not going to, you've got this whole cottage industry of Hoffa people for, the past, almost 50 years following it and talking about it. And, he's buried under Giant Stadium. He's buried in a garbage dump in New Jersey or whatever. It makes zero sense to kill the most well-known labor leader in the country and then transport his body multiple states just to dispose of it. That made zero sense. So I would kind of believe what Bill has to say about that.
Yeah. I think one of the movies or documentaries, that was their surmise or something. I don't remember. But this is something that's intrigued us for, I don't know, almost 100 years. I think we've been enthralled by it. And there's a romanticism to it that I think we have that's kind of interesting. I don't know why. Maybe it's power. Maybe it's respect. Maybe it's, I had issues with my dad, and I thought that was complicated. But Jesus, this takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah. I don't think, it's not an excuse for why Billy went with Russell. He had a terrible relationship with his own father. Yeah. And like you said, it happens to a lot of people. And it's not a reason why someone might go do something they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. Plus my dad, wasn't, all that powerful when I came.
Right. But my father was a New York City police officer, right?
Uh-huh.
So had I met someone like Russell Bufalino, the only thing I would be thinking of is, my father in the back of my mind saying, just turn around and walk away.
Yeah.
Bill didn't. Billy liked Russell. Russell had a way about him. Russell took him in. Russell taught him. Russell trained him. He became, he gave Billy an opening into a world that most people never would have. I mean, there's scenes in the book where you're just meeting, they met Frank Sinatra, for instance, in New York, where Russell basically goes to a restaurant and a bar that Sinatra frequented and sits at a table at Sinatra's table. And when he's told that Sinatra's coming that night, he says, well, you tell him this is my table, and if he wants, he could join me. And that's what happened. Sinatra shows up and he joins Russell, and Billy was there. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that Bill, it was a trade-off, obviously, but Bill, to his credit, I asked him this question multiple times, and I said, do you have any regrets at all? And he said no. And
Wow.
Therein lies the title of the book, The Life We Chose. He chose it. It didn't end well for him, as you read in the book, but he doesn't have any regrets, and he'd do the whole thing again.
There you go. Well, I can't wait to see it in the movies. It's got to end up as a movie. This is one of those books that has to be a movie, because we love these characters. We love the stories. We love romanticizing everything about it. I just watched The Godfather 50th anniversary in theaters, and it's a remastered version. It was so beautiful to watch again. And knowing some of the background stories, like from books like yours and Mr. Seals, as to how complicated these were. If I recall rightly, the story is what was it? Frank Sinatra's story with was it Benny Youngman?
Johnny Fontaine.
Yeah, the Johnny Fontaine story of the band contract, and I think wasn't Benny Youngman's band or whatever that story came from with Frank Sinatra. It's a true story. He'd signed him to a lifelong contract, and he wouldn't let him out of it. And,
there was two. So actually, two things. Russell, despite his outsized influence on The Godfather, he would never watch the movie. He refused to see it.
Really?
And even when the producer, Al Ruddy, offered him a private showing, Russell didn't want to watch it. And then I also asked Bill, I said, what was the most realistic mob movie that you ever saw? And he said Goodfellas.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. He said for the day-to-day on what these guys did and how they lived and whatnot, he said Goodfellas was the most realistic, which was also based on a very good book by Nick Pileggi. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, another great movie, Goodfellas. I mean, just what a story, man. So this is really interesting. Anything more you want to tease out or pitch before we go?
No, it's just, I'm glad you had me on and talk about this a bit. It turned out to be, from getting an email dropped on my lap to 3 years later, being published a week ago and the book doing really well. My understanding is we already went to a second printing after just 3 days.
Holy crap. Nice.
So it's been really well received. So I'm happy about that. So it's a very, very unique and interesting story. And I'm sure, your viewers would find it really compelling.
Definitely. People love these stories and the romanticism behind them. So pick it up wherever fine books are sold. And it's Delia, right?
Delia. Billy Delia.
I got to get that right. Order up wherever fine books are sold. The Life We Choose, William Big Billy Delia. Delia? I'm still
Delia.
Delia.
There you go.
The Life We Choose, William Big Billy Delia. Why am I having such a hard time? And the Last Secrets of America's Most Powerful Mafia Family. Matt, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
And give us a .com as a shout out as we go out.
MattBirkbeck.com is the website, and matt.birkbeck.author is Instagram.
There you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, all those places on the internet the Chris Voss Show is. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you guys next time. And that should have us out.